Welcome to the NetTuts.com Screencast of the Week, and today we are taking on a massive project that hopefully we can get through within 45 minutes or so. And we are going to be setting up a simple login system, for, just a simple site. Maybe if you want to add photos or a simple blog, something like that. So we're going to be using prepared statements, some classes. We'll be connecting to a database. We'll be using MySQL improved. We're going to be doing a lot of stuff. We're going to add some Jquery into it, though if you don't do it, don't worry. It's not necessary by any means. We're just going to have some fun. Okay, so before we get into it, let me show you what we will be building. So I'm going to go to Chrome, and I'm sorry I'm on such a low resolution. This thing looks huge. But let's go ahead and just insert gibberish. It's going to connect to a database and see if the database has a record containing this username and password. So I'll click Login. And looks like I still have a debug there. I'll have to get rid of that. But we entered it wrong, and it comes up with please enter a correct username. If we want, we can get rid of that. And this time I'm going to try it again, and I believe I set it up as username and password. And now it creates a session, and it sends me to a secure page that I wouldn't have been able to access if I did not have that session created. So if we want, we can log out, and now if I try to go back to that page, index.php, it redirects me right back to the login screen. Okay? So that's what we're going to be building today. I have no idea how long this is going to take. There's so much I want to cover, and I think I'm going to have to end up splitting this into two parts, but hopefully we can do as much as we can within about 45 minutes or so. So without further ado, the first thing that we want to do is create a database to store our users. So I'm going to go to, assuming you have PHP MyAdmin installed, I'm going to go to PHP MyAdmin. And this is the membership table that I created, but let's go ahead and drop that just so we can do it together. And I'm going to come back to the front, and we are going to create a new database. And I'm going to call this membership. And if you're working along with me, sometimes it's a good idea just to kind of write it down. That way you don't have to, you're not having brain freezes. So let's create a database, and within the database, I'm going to create my first table called users. Now, because this is a tutorial, we're going to keep it as simple as possible. So we're only going to have three fields: an ID, a username, and a password. Though, in your application, you should think about we are going to be hashing the password. So you need to find a way to send the user their password if they forget it. Now, that's beyond the scope of this tutorial. But you would want to add maybe a secret question and things like that. So ID, it's going to be a primary key and auto increment. The username is going to be a varchar, let's say maybe 15 characters total. The password, we could do password for this. For now, let's do varchar, and I'm going to set it really high because we're going to be hashing that with PHP's MD5 function. But we might change that, I'm not sure. I'm kind of flying by the seat of my pants. So I'm going to click Save. And here is what it created for us. So let's insert a new user. We don't have to add ID since we set it to a primary key and to auto increment. And for a username, I'm just going to keep it simple. Username, and I'm going to paste in a hashed version that I already have saved. Right there. Okay, so this is the MD5 hashed version of the word password. So I'm going to save that, click Go. And you can see here it created the necessary information for me. So that should be good for the database, at least for now. Now, for those of you that read my tutorial not too long ago, you'll notice that I recommended creating a simple template, and that's what we're going to work off today. So I'm going to go to where I store my PHP files, and I've created a site called membership site. I'm going to delete these so we can start from scratch. But all I'm doing here is within this template that I use for a bunch of projects, I have a blank index.html file that contains a few simple things like a script to Jquery and links to CSS files, etc. Within a CSS folder, this default.css file is blank, and then I also have a modified version of Eric Meyer's reset.css file that I'm also linking to. Then, within the JS folder, this is a IE6 ping fix that we may or may not use. I'm not sure yet. So I'm just going to grab these, I'm going to copy them, and I'm going to come into our new project and paste them in. Okay, so that's what we need to get started. I'm going to load up my code editor. Today I'm using Dreamweaver, and here is our site. So if I click on index.php, whoops, there we go. And let's close this out, and let's just quickly go over it. We're, like I said, referencing two CSS files. We're saying if the user has IE 6 or below, import that script. Though with PNG transparency, that probably won't even be necessary. But I don't have fireworks on this computer, so we may just have to revert back to the script. Linking to the new version of jQuery, opening just some basic document.ready, and my div container. That's it. Pretty simple, okay? So the first thing that I want to do with you, just once again for your reference, is we're going to create this login section. So I'm going to create a new page called login.php. Okay, let's go ahead and open that up, and we'll give it a title. Login to access the secret files. And within the body, let's create a form. So we'll first wrap it within a div with an ID of login. And let's add our form. So form method equals post, and the action, it's going to post to itself. So we'll just leave that blank for now. And let's add an h2 tag, and it'll just say login. And then within small tags, I'll write enter your credentials. And if you see, I'm just pretty much copying what we have here. Close that out. And close out the h2 tag. Next, we're going to wrap these within paragraph tags just to save ourselves some time. And we'll create a label. Label for an input name called name. And we'll call that username. And let's create our input. So input type equals text. And the name is username. Okay, that looks good there. Let's create another one. And this one will be a label for password. We'll call the input password, and we'll add the password. All right, and finally do input type. This is going to be a password type so that you can't see. It comes up with those little stars. And the name is going to be equal to pwd for password. All right, that looks good. And then finally, let's just add our submit button. And it'll be input type equals submit. We'll give it an ID, though we may not need that. But let's keep it in just in case we're going to access it with jQuery. Value is going to be login. And then finally, we need a name called submit. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Why don't we go to Chrome just to get an idea of where we are. Localhost, come down, and let's open membership site. And we need to go to login.php. Okay, pretty much what you would expect. So now I'm going to add some stylings. So let's come back to our CSS folder and open up default.css, and I'm going to, this is the only area that I'm not going to do by hand, simply because it would turn the tutorial into 2 hours. But I will go over everything, but don't worry, it's nothing too fancy, it's just a simple login styling, and you would probably have your own anyways. So I'm going to come back to login.php and make sure that I reference that correctly. So we'll do link rel equals style sheet, type equals text/CSS, and href is going to be css/default.css. Okay, so if we link to it correctly, let's come back, and the only other thing I want is if we come to our original, I'm using some images here. Once again, it's beyond the scope of the tutorial. If you guys want, I'll show you how to do it in another tutorial, but I just don't think it's really necessary. It's just, you know, it's a pretty simple form. So I'm going to grab some images from my original project, and I'm sorry this one was kind of sloppy. I didn't get organized, but I'm going to copy those, and I'm going to come back to Dreamweaver and paste them in. Let's try that one more time. Take those and bring them in. Okay, and to stay organized, let's create a new folder called images. And I'm just going to grab each of those and bring them in. Oh, this is a nice feature in Dreamweaver. I'm sorry, I'm just getting started. I've been using Notepad++ for a while. I've moved the images to a new folder, and it's asking me, would you like to update the default.css file to reference that? So that's a really nice feature. I was going to have to do that on my own. To update links in membership site, it must be saved first. Yes. Okay, so let's go back to default.css and see what that did. Yeah, really nice feature. Very nice, Dreamweaver. Okay, so we have images. White gradient. Let's go over those real quickly. You can barely see it probably in this screencast, but right here, if I can get my highlighter, right around there, there's just somewhat of a subtle gradient. Let's come back. Login BG, that is this section right here. Okay, so kind of this wrapping feature. And I have the text login in the image, but if you disable CSS, it'll just come up with the normal text. Let's see what else. Where are you, Dreamweaver? There it is. Whoops. Okay, and finally, H2. You know what? I think what I just mentioned is H2, and login BG. You know what? That may be nothing. We might be able to just get rid of that. So we'll look at that later. Actually, you know, let's just so you don't get confused, let's find it real quick. We have white gradient. I have H2 BG. Yeah, you know what? Login BG must have been something that I was working on before, so we can delete that. Okay, so now let's come back to our page and see what this gave us. And this is pretty much what it comes up with. So if you like, I'm going to just take a couple minutes and explain the CSS file. But if you don't care, just fast forward about 2 minutes ahead. Okay, so I'm sorry this is a little sloppy. I did this real quickly last night. Set a basic font family. Login. In order, there's kind of a trick that has pros and cons to, and I wish I could zoom out here, but yeah, with background images, you can't do it too well. If you want to vertically and horizontally center an element, kind of a cool CSS way is you have to specifically state a height and width. So right here. Now, obviously, there's cons to that, but for this, it works just fine because we're not going to be adding too much. And then we take the height and we set the position to absolute, and we set the top to 50%, and then we pull it back up half of the height. So we take this whole thing and drop it down 50% of the window. So now the top edge of the login border is going to be centered, but we want the center of this login div to be centered. So we subtract 1/2 of the height. Okay. So if you see here, and I'm sorry, I probably should have taken some time to clean this up to get a bit more organized, but no big deal. I've set a minimum height of 330 because if the user enters an invalid username and password, it needs to be able to stretch like so to add the alert box. So if we had specifically stated it, that alert would have gone over the edge. However, IE6 and below does not recognize minimum height correctly. However, when you specify a height in IE6, it kind of interprets it the same way as minimum height. So I'm just using a hack here to target, with the underscore hack, to target height. Okay, added some CSS borders, and I had to add another IE6 hack later down the road. Nothing too big, though. Don't worry about this too much. Heading 2, I just added that background that creates the curved right here. And like I said, if you guys really want me to, I'll go and explain this in a future tutorial. And I set a font size for our labels and made the inputs kind of large. Input, yeah, you know, nothing too big. Here's the alert. When an alert pops up, we added some information. We will add that with Jquery. And then also, you see here, once again, let's create invalid. We have this little X here. If we click it, it gets rid of it. The styling right there, it's a span with a class of exit. Okay? And, you know, it's just simple things right there. Okay, that's as much as I'm going to cover for that. Feel free to look at it more on your own. So let's come back to login, and now we've created our form. Now when the user clicks on the submit button, it's going to post to itself. So let's go up to the very top and start adding some PHP. And the first thing that we are going to be using is we're going to add sessions in order to keep a user logged in. So let's do session start. You have to do that to every page that you're going to be when you're going to be utilizing sessions. And let's check if if the page is posted and not empty, post, and we want to make sure that the password, the username field isn't empty, and also the password field isn't empty. So if all of those are true, then we are going to validate this data. This is one weird feature for those of you that use Dreamweaver. When I'm writing PHP and I hit enter, it doesn't take me all the way back to the beginning. So if you guys know how to fix that, see? It's one gripe, and I'm sure I just don't know what I'm doing with this program. But anyways, so we've checked to see if the user entered a username and password. Now, let's validate the user. And the way I'm going to do that is using a class. Sometimes it's just a little bit easier to organize your code. Rather than writing it all here, I can simply call some class, some class validate user, something like that. And then it's just easier on the mind, you know exactly what it's doing. So let's go back to our solution, and I'm going to create a new folder, and we're going to call this classes. Okay, and now I'm going to add a new file, and let's call the first one membership.php. That's going to be our class. So I'm going to click to open that up, and let's get started. I can get rid of all of this because we're only doing PHP. And since we're only doing PHP, I don't have to create a PHP closing tag. Okay? So we know our class is going to be called membership. So let's go ahead and create that class, membership. Remember, it's not a function, so we're not going to add the parentheses. Just do it like that. Okay, so we've created a class of membership. We're going to add a bunch of functions in here, but the first one is we want to validate the user. So it's always best, if you're confused, just go back and think, all right, what are we trying to do again? We are going to take whatever the user entered into those username and password text boxes, and we're going to search the database and say, if you found a record that matches these, we know that it's a user, that they're a member, and so you can go ahead and create a session and log them in. All right? So let's create this function, and I'm going to call it, validate user. Okay, so this function is going to need a couple parameters. It needs to know what the user entered into the username field and what they entered into the password field, correct? So let's create those variables that it will pass into it. So UN for username and password. Okay, what next? We need to connect to a database. So one, we could put the database connection right in here. But when you're making classes, you need to be thinking about reusability as much as you possibly can. So if I put in all of these hard-coded values into this class, then I can't easily take it into a new project. Okay? So why don't we create a new class for MySQL, okay? Because it's something, you'll connect to a database all the time, so maybe it's easier just to go ahead and have its own class that you can pass from project to project. So that's at least what I'm going to do. I'm going to call this mysql.php. All right, so open that up. Once again, I can get rid of all this and open the PHP, and this is going to be a class called MySQL. Okay, so we'll create a new function in here, and this is going to be verify, because this is something you'll probably do quite a bit if you have some kind of login system. So verify username and pass. I know that's a little long, but at least it helps me, and it's worth typing a little more to understand exactly what I'm using. So once again, it's going to accept those same two values. Now remember, these are always going to refer to what the user entered into the text, into the username and password field. Though when we call this function, this method, we need to make sure that we pass it in. So let's create a query. But no, first let's create a connection to the database. So let's create a con for connection. It's going to be equal to a new instance of the mysqli, and we need to pass in some values. We need to pass in what server we're using, the name of our username for the database, the password for the database, and it also needs to know what database do you want to select. Now, once again, I could add these into this file, but as soon as I bring it into a new project, I'm going to have to go back in here and edit the file, and that kind of defeats the purpose of reusability. So if you find many people, you'll find that many people keep a page called constants.php. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my site, and that's what we're going to do. Let's create a new folder called includes, and I'm going to add a file, new file, and let's call it constants.php. Okay, once again, get rid of that. I know that especially if you're a beginner, this might seem like, oh, there's so much work, but I recommend, do your own research and go and watch this a few times, because at least when I got started, it definitely threw me for a loop. So, define constants here. And let's do define, and we're going to create some variables. So the first one is going to be DB server. If you use WordPress, you probably are familiar with something like this. And the server, at least for my computer, is going to be localhost. What else? Let's do DB user. And that's going to be equal to, this is my connection to PHP at myadmin, to MySQL that I have set up. Okay, so I created one especially for this tutorial called DB of user, and we need a password, so DB password, and that's going to be equal to nettuts. And then finally we have, why do I keep forgetting that E? Finally, we're going to have the name of the database that we can connect, because remember, we can have multiple databases. So we'll call that one DB name, and that one is going to be membership. Now, if you remember, that was the name of the database we created earlier. Okay, that looks good there. So now let's come back to mysql.php, and when we instantiate, we can just pass in those variables. So new mysqli, and the new connection will be, whoops, sorry about that. The first one is going to be the server, so it wants to know what host, so type in that variable, and then the username, then the password, and then finally the database name that we're connecting to. So connect to that, and let's go ahead and close this so I have some more real estate. So we're going to try to connect to that, or if you couldn't, just die, so or die, and we'll just type in something like there was a problem connecting to the database. Okay, and since I'm on such a small screen, let's put that onto its own line. Okay, so connection, and by the way, for those of you more qualified, we will improve this, but I'm keeping it as simple so we can kind of slowly work our way up to some more advanced features. So connection, new mysqli, pass in the username, the server, username, password, and the database, but if you couldn't do that, just go ahead and die. Now, this class is going to be wondering what the heck are these names. We have to be able to reference it. So at the very top, let's make sure that we require that constants.php. So require once constants.php. Okay? Actually, let's get rid of that. Okay. Now we are properly referencing these values. So we have our function verify username and pass. So we've created our connection. Next, let's go ahead and create a query. Let's call it query variable, and we are going to select everything from the users table that we created. So from users, where the username field is equal to, and we're going to be using prepared statements, So we'll use a question mark, and this will, it's much faster using prepared statements, and it's much more secure, so you don't have to worry about SQL injection as much. Where username equals question mark, and password. And remember, username and password, these are referring to our fields within our database. And password equals, and we'll also do a question mark. And then finally, we want to make sure, just for some added security, that only one is being retrieved. Because if it's retrieving more than one, we know there's a problem. So we'll set limit 1. Close out the quote, end of statement, add a semicolon. Okay, so now let's prepare our statement. So we'll do if, and we'll create a variable called stmt for statement, equals connection, and we're going to prepare our query. So get it ready to go. So if that worked successfully, then run some code. Otherwise, we're not going to do anything. We could pass an error or something like that. So we'll do a statement, once again, that we created, bind some parameters. So bind underscore param. And we need to tell it what the values for these two question marks are going to be. So the way we do that is we first start out by telling it what kinds of values they'll be. Are they going to be a Boolean, an integer, a string? What are they? Well, these two are going to be strings. So we'll do S for the first one and S for the second one. And I'm going to do a comma, and I'm going to enter those values. Well, remember, this method is going to accept the username that the user entered and the password. So that's what we want to verify. So UN password. Okay, so we've bound the parameters. Let's do statement and execute. Okay, so if we've prepared the query, we've added the parameters. Now go ahead and execute this. Next, we'll do if the statement dot fetch, and that means if you did retrieve rows, meaning if you did find something that matched those values, then we know that it's a user and we can log them in. I have no idea why it keeps adding those break tags. So let's go ahead and close the statement because we don't need it anymore. So close. And I'm just going to return true, because if it doesn't return true, we can know to throw an error. So let me look over this. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Now there's, sorry about that again. Clean that up a little bit more. Okay, so now I have no idea why my the color coding, I'm sure that'll catch up in just a moment, unless I made a mistake. Let's think of this for a moment. We have our MySQL database, but we're connecting to the database within this function. So what if we added another method down the road, maybe update user? Well, then within that method, we'd connect to the database again. So doesn't that seem a little silly to have all these different connections? So why don't we go ahead and create a construct for the class where we go ahead and connect to the database? So what I'm going to do, there it goes, now it catches up, is I'm going to create a private property, and we're going to call it con, which is the same thing that we have right here. Private simply means that it can only be accessed, this property can only be accessed from this class or any of its children. Okay, if it was public, we could access it anywhere, but we don't want that. So I'm going to do private con, I'm sorry, no $ in front of there. And let's create a function called construct. Now this is a special, it's referred to as a magic method. And this is a method that's going to run as soon as this MySQL class is instantiated. So what we can do is we can refer to this, meaning refer to this object, and this connection. Now when we're referring to a property, we can leave off the $, like so. And that's going to be equal to a new MySQLi instance. So I'm just going to grab that, paste that in, like so. And let's clean that up just a little bit. And now I can come back down here, get rid of this original connection. And now any method that we use, we can immediately access this connection rather than having to create new connections every time, which is silly. but we need to come down here and make sure that we can no longer reference this connection variable like so. Instead, we need to make sure that we go to the object and then find this connection and then prepare it. So let's get rid of that. And I'm going to change it to this con. Once again, I can leave off the $, that prepare. Okay, so that looks pretty good. There's a chance I might have made a mistake in there somewhere, but that looks pretty good so far. So if you're getting a little flustered, don't worry. This is pretty darn simple. We're just connecting to a database. We're checking to see if any record matches what the username entered. If it did, let's go ahead and return true because it's successful. So it's going to return true to this membership class where we want to call it. So let's call it right now. In order to call a class from another class, I need to make sure that I reference it. So we can do require, what do we call it? mysql.php. Although, you know what? I don't think I'm referencing these correctly. Am I? Classes? No, that's fine. I might have to change that in the login. Let's see. Nope, haven't even gotten there yet. Sorry about that. Once again, the damn break tag. Excuse my language. So function validate user. Let's create a new instance of this MySQL class. So, or MySQL class. So a MySQL is going to be equal to a new instance of the MySQL object. And now we've created essentially a copy. So now we can work with that. So let's create a new variable. And once again, I'm going to make it as easy to understand for me as possible. So I'm going to call this ensure credentials. And that's going to be equal to MySQL verify username. I believe that's what we called it. Let's go back. Verify username and pass. So I'm just going to copy that and paste it in. Now remember, if we go back, this method right here needs to accept 2 values. So we got to make sure that we pass them in. And we remember, this method is already accepting those values. So we can just take those and pass them on. So within parentheses, I'm going to paste this in. Close that out. And add a semicolon. Now, one thing to note is, if you remember when we created that database, we added a hashed version of the password. I just went ahead and put that in. So if the user enters, I believe the actual password is just the string password. But if it compares the string password to the hashed version of password, it's not going to return true. It's going to return an error. So I need to go ahead and hash what the user enters. And we can use that using a function called MD5. So I'm going to take that and wrap it like so. And now they should be identical. So you might be wondering, why did I set this equal to this variable right here? And it's because when we run it, it's going to return true. But if I don't capture that value, then it's just going to dissipate. It's going to disappear. So I need to make sure that this holds the value. So let's do another if statement. And we'll say if ensure credentials. Let's just copy that so we have no typos. So if that is equal to true, and we know if the connection to the database was performed successfully and it found a record, it is going to return true. If that's returned true, then create a session. And we can do that using the global array session. And I'm going to call this status. And it's going to be equal to authorized. That sounds good. Next, header, we're going to send them to the secret page that has the secret documents. So location index.php, send them there. And then finally, that looks good. However, what if ensure credentials doesn't return true? And I wonder here, if statement fetch return true, I wonder if I need to add a return else return false. I don't think I do, but we may need to come back to that. So right here, we're going to add else return. Please enter a correct username and password. Because we ensured the credentials, so if that returned true, we go ahead and log them in by essentially creating a session. But if it did not find it, they entered the wrong password, so return, please enter a correct username and password. So if we come back to login.php, we've added this here, but we haven't called anything yet. So, and I'm sorry, I know this seems a little difficult, and there's really no easy way to go over it, so just watch it a few times if you need to. So let's come back to login.php. So now, in order to validate the user, as you may know, we need to create a new instance of the membership object. So let's make sure we require it. So require once membership, and actually I think it's classes / membership.php. And then we can create a new variable called membership and make that equal to a new instance of the membership class. So new membership, like so. And now we can work with it. So if the user enters something into the username and password field and they're not empty, let's do membership, which is the copy of the object, validate user. Okay, so we come back here. I want to go over this as much as I can if you need to. If they entered something, then call this method right here, validate user. And the way we access it is doing creating a copy essentially by doing membership, and that's now referring to a copy of this class, membership dot validate user. All right. So once again, we need to pass in what the user enters into those two text boxes. So let's just do that. Post username. Add that one, and post pwd was the name of the password field, correct? Yes. Yeah, that looks good. Now, remember, we have called this method, but if we don't capture the product, if we don't capture what is returned, then it's going to disappear. So I want to make sure that I make this return, whatever's returned from this, equal to something. So let's just create a variable called response equals membership validate user, add those in. Okay, hopefully you're kind of grasping this. Next, I want to display, if this response, I want to display whatever is returned. So we can come down here, and after our form, let's add a PHP block. So we'll do PHP if is set, and that variable, and it will only be is set if it returned with an error. If that is set, let's echo, and we'll add an h4, and I'm going to give it a class of alert, and that's referring to a class in the CSS file that just kind of adds, kind of a background and a dotted border and pretty much that. So alert, and let's add that response. Okay, and make sure we close out the h4 tag. Okay, so if is set, if that variable exists, echo out a class. So let's come back and see where we are right now. I'm sure there's probably some mistake. So we're going to browse to membership.login.php, and immediately we see parse error expecting a closed parentheses on line 6. So let's come back. I'm sure you guys saw that. Line 6, if post and empty. Yeah, so let's close that one. And empty, and I think another one. Might be right. Require once. So we get this warning. Require once, failed to open stream. Classes / membership / PHP. Come back, and of course, I made the mistake right there. I'm sure you guys saw that too and said, what is he doing? So membership.php. Let's see what other errors I made. Parse error, membership on line 3. So, I apologize for this, but it's just what happens, especially with the screencast. You make a bunch of errors, but as long as you fix them, no big deal. So it had a parse error in the membership class on line 3. So let's go over to that and find require mysql, close that out with a semicolon. All right, just little mistakes that are quick fixes. Let's see what else. And it's still there. Fun stuff. Require, spelled it wrong. Still spelled it wrong. Require. Refresh it. Okay, and here's another. And, don't worry if you just seem to get error after error, because kind of like with CSS and errors, sometimes it's just one or two things that are causing all of the problems. And like I said, I was pretty sure that I was going to have some problems with the correct paths. And if we come to MySQL, what it's referring to, constants.php, we're in this class, so it's looking for a file named constants.php within the class, but we need to tell it, no, not in the class, within the includes folder instead. So includes. And let's see if that fixes it. Hopefully that'll be enough. Yeah, and now it loads. So let's enter gibberish. No, it didn't work, so it added this on. We're going to add some jQuery to it, but truthfully, it's more just to have fun and just to have a long screencast because it's really not necessary. But let's try, what's the username and password that we created? Did we call it username and password? Remember, it's going to take the string password, and using MD5, it's going to hash it and compare that hashed value against what was in the database. So connect. And it sends us correctly to index.php, though we haven't really created that. So let's go ahead and rename this to index.php. All right. And within here, let's add just some quick information, like you've reached the page that stores all of the secret launch codes. Okay, and let's also create a link for them to log out. So after our paragraph, let's add an href, and it's going to send us back to login.php. But we need a way to tell it that the user wants to log out. So let's add a query string, and I'm going to add a status as a key, and the value is going to be logged out. Okay, so that's where it's going to be sent, and we'll just create a text will be log out. Okay, let's come back, refresh that page. Remember, we have anchor tag. Let's fix that. Down, looks good, come back, refresh the page. Now it's kept us logged in, and the reason there's no stylings there is because I'm referencing Eric Meyer's reset and I haven't created defaults yet. So let's refresh the page, and now we have some kind of browser styling. So you've reached the page, and it's staying there because we've created a session. So we could leave it, we could go back to login.php and then come back index.php, and it's going to remember us. Now, we have not set a expiration, which you really should. There's just so much going on in this tutorial. I'm going to save that for a later date. I'm gonna, maybe in a later tutorial, I'll show you how to set expirations and to allow users to retrieve passwords or to create new users, to delete users, lots of stuff. And it's just too much for a tutorial that's already going way too long. All right, so if we click on logout, it's going to send the user back to login PHP status equals logged out. Now, we haven't removed the cookie, so and remember, when you use session, it does add a cookie with a session ID on the user's computer. But we haven't done anything yet, so that's what we're going to do next. So I'm going to come back to login.php, and above the post, let's add, if we want, we can just add some comments to make it easy. So we could say, did the user enter a password, username, and click submit. Okay, if you want, feel free to add these. And for the query string, we're going to say if the user clicks the log out link on the indexed page. This code is only going to run if that happens. So if is set get and that key. So remember, it sends this key. So it's going to check, did you find that in the URL, the URI? And check that. And if it's if that key is equal to log, what did we call it? Logged out. Copy that. If that's equal to logged out, then we know that the user wants to log out. So let's go ahead and once again, I don't know why it's doing that. Let's bring that back. I'm sure I can turn that off somewhere. Okay, so we need to create a new function, or within a class we can create a new method to log the user out. So we know we've created a copy, we've instantiated this membership class. So let's do membership, and let's just make something up, and we'll create it later. What's something easy to remember? Log user out, like so. So let's come back to membership.php and let's write that. If we want, we could add it. There's no specific order. If you want, you can comment these lines. So we could say end validate user if you want. I'm not going to bother with that. But we'll do this one at the next. Let's do function. And once again, I'm going to close this out to have some more real estate. Let's method of function log user out. So if is set, remember, it's possible that somehow the user could type this in themselves even though they aren't logged in and they don't have a session. A session was never created. So why don't we just double check and make sure that a session does exist for that user. So if is set session, and the name of the session was status that we called earlier, unset it. Okay, get rid of the session. So we can call unset, and make sure that you don't just do unset session. You don't want to do that. You just want to type in the specific key, like so. Oh no, what happened? Unset session. Oh, I'm sorry, I don't know what's happening. Too much caffeine. Okay, unset session. Next, let's also get rid of the cookie on the user's computer, just to be good Boy Scouts. So let's do if is set and cookie. And I'm going to check. And the way we can check for the specific cookie is it's saved as a session name. Something like this, session name. So if that is set, let me make sure I got my parentheses right. Close that out. And one more. If that's set, we'll do the shorthand. So rather than doing open curly brace, we can just type it right here. So set cookie. And the way we remove a cookie is by actually setting a cookie and setting the expiration date to a time before the current time. So it's kind of weird. So set cookie, and the name is going to be session name. Make sure it has the exact same name. It doesn't need a value, but we want to make sure that the expiration date is before the current time. So let's just do something like 10,000. That's fine. And let's see if I can zoom out. No, I can't zoom out in Dreamweaver. Sorry about that. So, you know what I'll do is I'll just bring these back. And that doesn't save at all. Whatever, who cares? Let's put it on its own line, like so. So if is set, if there is a cookie, set a cookie and get rid of it. And then finally, the last thing that we want to do, and I need to make sure I close that out, is get rid of the session. We don't want it at all, so make sure we destroy session. Okay, I think that works. Once again, it's possible that I looked over something. I went ahead and created this system last night, but I'm kind of doing it from memory, so I'm sure there's plenty of mistakes. And one of them that I already see, that I was thinking about earlier, is, where is it? I really don't, in the membership class, I don't want to direct them here. I just want to set the session, and probably a better practice would be, rather than redirecting them, because we can't reuse it then, is return true. And then we can capture that within login.php, and we can say if is true, redirect the user to index.php. So that would be the better way. If we have enough time, I'll come back and fix that. Okay, so login. So we've created log user out. So let's see if it worked. So I'm going to go back to index.php. We should still be logged in because I haven't set an expiration date for a session. For, whether it's 15 minutes, and like I said, we'll do that in another tutorial. But if we click on this logout button, hopefully it'll work, but we might get an error. Let's see, logout, and we did get another damn error. Expecting a comma or a parenthesis or a closed parentheses on line 7. Line 7, if is set, once again, I always forget these, and get status. equals logged out. And I think that's all. I think I just forgot that closed parentheses for this one. Let's come back, refresh the page, try it again, log out. And it should have successfully logged us out. Now, keep in mind though, if we come back to index.php, we have nothing here that's restricting the user from accessing it. So we need to write a little bit of code to say, does the user's computer have a session? And if it does, allow them in. Otherwise, let's get rid of them and send them back to login.php. So come to the very top, PHP, and let's require once. Once again, what is the path? Let's just grab that right there. Require once classes membership. And let's create, once again, a new variable called membership. Remember, it's not gonna travel between pages, so we'll need to create a new instance and instantiate it each time. So new membership. And we're gonna create, I'm sure you could guess, a method to confirm this rather than writing it into each page. So let's do membership, and let's just make something up. Confirm member. Confirm that they're a member. Okay. Okay. Let's come to membership. Come down and let's create a new function right here. Function confirm member. All right, we have our new method. So if you remember, in order to work with the session, we have to use session start at the top of each page. But since we're calling confirm member at the very top, if we want, we could just go ahead and place that within confirm member. It's not necessary, but let's go ahead and do that. So we will do session start. Although I wonder if it might be better to leave that out. I don't know. We'll go over this. I'll go over this over the next couple days, and I'm sure you guys will have plenty of thoughts on how to make this better. So if session status, meaning if there is a session, or we could say if the value of the session, because there could be multiple sessions. So if the value is not, or I'm sorry, if the value is not authorized, we know that they cannot be on this page. So if that's the case, send them to login.php, like so. All right, so that should be all for our confirm member. Yeah, I think that's fine. So come back to index.php and we just call confirm member, and it's going to check. And all it's going to do is, we don't really necessarily need to return anything. It might be a good practice to, but if there is no session, it's going to send them away. Otherwise, it's not going to do anything. So, we might be able to make that better. Let's refresh it, and let's go to index.php. Aha! So I entered it, but it immediately redirected me back because we're not allowed to be there. So once again, let's do username, password. Didn't allow us, so let's put in the correct username and password that we have in a database. And now it sent us to the page that stores all the secret launch codes. If we log out, it should remove the session. Let's see if it worked though, index.php, and it did work. And just to prove it, once again, let's just try to access it. Let's go back to login, and this time try to go back to index.php, and it allowed us because we haven't logged out. All right, so I have no idea how long this has taken. 53 minutes, this is going really long. That's pretty much the tutorial, I think. I'm sure there's something I missed that I'll have to come back to. But if you want, why don't you stick around, and if you want to do some fun Jquery, like I said, it's just fun. You can skip around this video as much as you want and watch it in bits and pieces. Let's add a little bit of Jquery so that we can kind of fade in this box right here, like so. So, if you're sticking around, thank you so much. It's definitely not necessary though, we're just adding some animation. I'm going to go to my JS folder and I'm going to add a new file, and I'm going to call this anything we want. We'll call it main.js. Alright, now let's go back, and the only place I'm going to use it is in the login.php, so I want to make sure that I reference it correctly. So first let's come to index.php, and I am going to grab all of this right here, because we're not using Jquery here, so I can cut that out and paste it in. Actually, we'll do that in a separate file. So all that I really need is the script file. And that's referencing Google's CDN. Something like that. And close that out. And now let's reference the JavaScript file that we just created. So script type equals text / JavaScript, and source is, let's just go ahead and browse to it since I have a terrible memory. Browse and JS main.js. All right, so now we're referencing it correctly. Let's go ahead and save that, open up main.js, and write some stylings. So we can do our standard document writing. I'm going to assume you have some knowledge. If not, go to ThemeForest and watch the Jquery for Absolute Beginners series. So when the document's ready to be manipulated, get an h4 tag with a class of alert. Now, if you remember, there will only be an h4 tag with a class of alert if there was an error. So we're targeting that. So get that alert tag, and we're going to hide it initially, and that's so we can fade it in. So we'll fade in over about 3/4 of a second. Then I want to add a way for the user to remove that box. Once again, it really serves no purpose, but it's just just a feature to add. So we'll add a span tag, and I need to figure out what the name of the CSS styling I set is. So let's come back, and if we come down to the bottom, I called it exit. It's an appropriate name. So span class equals exit, and we've created that. I'm sorry, I need to actually add the tags, of course, like so. We'll type in the letter X to serve as the that little exit button. Close out the span tag, and let's append it to, where should we append it? We have it wrapped within the login, so let's append it to login. So append to login. Actually, no, I'm sorry. We don't want to append it to the login. We want to append it to that h4 tag, of course. So let's append it to the h4 with a class of alert. Yeah. And now we just want to check for if that span tag is clicked. So if span with the class of alert is clicked, syntax error. If it's clicked, let's write a function. Once again, why is it doing that? Somebody please leave a comment and let me know how I can fix that. Click, and let's get this, and we want to tell it when that little span tag is clicked, get that entire h4 tag and remove it. So this dot parent h4 with the class of alert dot fade out, and we'll just do a generic slow. All right, let's see if I did that correctly. Might have forgotten to reference something. Refresh the page, insert something wrong. And now you see it faded it in. Jquery added this box, so if JavaScript is disabled, it'll just show up like normal, like it's been showing. But if I click anywhere in here, it's not going to do anything. But if I click on that X, and if I click it, it's not working. So let's see what I forgot to do. And of course, I changed it from exit to alert. So alert, yeah. Try that one more time. Fades that in. If I click it, it fades out. Okay, so type in username, password. It sends us secure page. If I click logout, it logs us out. So that was about an hour. I'm sorry it sometimes came across as disorganized, but it's really hard to go over so much. So if you have any questions or if you have any advice, I'd love to learn more. And I have plenty more to learn. So I'd love to help you if you guys are willing to help me. So I will see you guys in a week. Thank you so much for sticking around for over an hour. For more tips and tutorials, please visit nettouch.com. And also, my pet project is we're doing tons of promotion on the ThemeForest blog. Let me zoom out here. Whoa, sorry about that. Tons of screencasts. So we have a new category called screencasts. If I click on that, and I'm sorry I'm on such a small screen, it's pushing it down. But we have this Diving into PHP series. We have a new WordPress series. Also, you only have about 2 days left to get in your submissions for the screencast competition. So thank you so much. I'll see you next week. I'm Jeffrey Way. Bye-bye.